Now let's talk about one of the most idiomatic pieces of Python functionality, the list comprehension. So here's an example with a for loop. We have a list of names which are all in lowercase. We want to get a list of the same names but with the first letters capitalized. So this is the title function we saw earlier when we talked about strings. Now we can go through them in a for loop, and we can call title on each one and append it to the list, and that will work. And we can see the output is what we expect. But we can do the same thing with what's called a list comprehension. A list comprehension is effectively a way of doing a for loop in one line. It's optimized at the code level, so they tend to be more efficient than a normal for loop. And they can be used for a lot of things in Python. So here's an example of doing the same thing we did above, but with a list comprehension. So the syntax for the list comprehension is the return value comes first, and then you have the for, and then you set a variable for what you're iterating in. So where we had name up here, name in names, here we have X in names, and where we had name title, we now have X title. And we see we get the same result. So this is something that you'll see all over the place in Python, and that you'll want to use for a lot of the work you do. Now, we already looked at the map function, and here's the example we had before, where we map the contents of this list into a series of strings based on that list. Now, with a list comprehension, we can do the same thing in one line. So here, we have our output, which is the string, which we saw appear as a return value. And then this is our iteration through the list. And that's all we need to do the same thing we did above in 4 lines. So you can see that the list comprehension can be used anywhere a map function is used, and often is easier to read. Now, here's our example from the filter function again. And we can see that in this one we return only the capital letters in a list of characters. Here we see that we can do the same thing with the list comprehension. And the trick is that we add a conditional to the list comprehension. So once again, we have our return value first, our iteration through the iterable, the for X in characters, and then we add a conditional at the end. If that conditional returns true, then that item will be returned as part of the list. So we can see that it has the same output as our filter above, but we do it all in one line. And it's very readable and very idiomatic to what you'll see in Python. Now, list comprehensions can work with multiple variables as well. So here we have 2 arrays, and we want to print out the 2 arrays as points, of XY points. So it begins the same way. We return value first, and then we have our iteration through those 2 lists. Now you see we've zipped these lists together. We've seen zip before, and it creates a list where a sub-lists are tuples of the contents of the other 2 lists. And you can see we unpack those into X and Y variables here in the iteration part. And then we can use those X and Y variables there. So you can see this prints out a list, and we have the items from each of the other lists used together as pairs in the output. And just as an example, we talked about the zip function. Here's what it looks like if you just call zip. So it pairs them as a list of tuples paired together. So what if you're given a list of lists and you want to turn it into one flat list? This is something that you can do with a list comprehension rather easily. So let's look at that. So what we're doing here is we want to go through each item in each list. The way we do this is first we say Y in list of lists. So Y then becomes each sublist. And then we want to go through each item in each of those. So we have for X in each Y, and then X is the return value. And you'll see that what this produces then is the flattened list that we desire. We can also nest list comprehensions, which becomes very powerful. So if we want to find all the integers greater than and with 3 as a factor and divide them by 2, we can start by making a list comprehension that goes through all the numbers below 20. So I think we're assuming we want to start with that. we want to find the ones that are divisible by 3. So we use the mod function and say if mod 0. And remember this, by using the conditional at the end, it effectively filters the results. And so now we only have results that are divisible by 3. Now if we take this whole list comprehension and nest it in another list comprehension, then we can filter that one for ones greater than 3, and then have the result be divided by 2. Now you can see here you can build up very complex functionality in list comprehensions, and I have to warn you that if you go too far with this, they become very unreadable, and at a certain point it's better to fall back to traditional for loops if you're going to have a lot of complication for the sake of maintainability and readability. But a simple one like this is still a powerful and useful tool in Python.